I've heard Glenn Lerner say this. I've heard James Farron say this. They all say, hey, you got to saturate the market for TV. And if you're not one of the top 3 spenders in TV, just don't do it. So you're on that boat. I've had a couple others say, oh, you can get a little strategic, but you're kind of on the, hey, you gotta really saturate the market to make TV work if someone's considering that.
I mean, look, I've spent, the last venture that I did was this lead gen. I spent, I think, 60 grand over a 2-month period for spots that ran, I think, 3 or 4 days a week in a really condensed time frame, and got one phone call, right? And it was produced by the TV station, following the model that the consultant said worked for the other places. So even taking it on that level and essentially kind of taking the equivalent spend. And what we did was we looked and said, okay, here's not we as in me, but the TV station. This is where, hey, these spots cost more, but there's not a lot of competition there. And it gets into, I guess, a little bit of the nitty gritty of how the big firms buy their media. And so even going, we're going to stay away, because a lot of times they want to sell you the court shows, for example, right? I don't know if you ever walked into a doctor's office that has the court shows on. Well, there's 7 PI attorneys with commercials back to back. How are you going to who's who, right? The only one that's going to, outpace that noise level is the highest spender. So yeah, right. Unless you are going to be everywhere, and I think honestly today it may be more than just who's going to spend more. If you're going to go that route, right? I think it's more than who's going to spend the most in TV. It's who's going to spend the most in TV, but who's also then going to spend the most in billboards, who's also then going to spend the most in radio. And if you hit those 3, yeah, sure. I mean, that's how Morgan & Morgan get, I would assume, a vast majority of their cases. But I mean, you can't throw a stone and not hit a billboard or hear a radio commercial or TV commercial.
I couldn't agree more. You have to have enough saturation, enough repetition to really stand out and be memorable. And then I want to also just briefly on OTT, because this is being talked about more and more. OTT, when we're saying that, it's essentially streaming, right? It's fractured. It's a fractured environment. We're talking Hulu, we're talking Netflix, we're talking all these different platforms, Disney Plus. The younger generation, the Gen Zs, the millennials, they don't even have cable anymore.
Right.
A lot of that audience has just shifted purely to the streaming devices, and there's just so many, Peacock and HBO Go and YouTube TV. It's on the OTT side. Did you go through the traditional TV advertisers that was offering OTT? Did you go to a digital provider? Kind of just tell me about your experience, because we haven't talked about that much on the OTT side.
Sure. So it was a local TV station approached me and said, hey, they wanted to come in and talk. And I said, well, I'm not interested in TV. Not happening. Yet they're actually the ones who got me with the consultant. And so I guess I didn't listen to myself all the way. But yeah, it was a local TV station that did it. They came in, they pitched it. Hey, look, I liked it. I really did. And from a branding perspective, do I think that it may have made some impact? Yeah, I do. But at the end of the day, if it's not actually producing cases, I look at it and evaluate and go, does it really need to stay? When you're talking about spending $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a month, which, in the big scheme of advertising isn't necessarily a lot, but you start getting more than that. And I mean, you get more than that. You got to bring in more than $1 million, every single year just to justify that spend, which means you're bringing in $100,000 every single month. Right. And it becomes this kind of give and take of where do we want to be? So do I like OTT? Yeah. And it essentially, my model and thought process of I want to live everywhere that is online. Right. But, I think for me, it just wasn't the right place, wasn't the right time, because I'd rather take those dollars and put them into a more direct with Instagram and Facebook and, on a lower level TikToks, just a little bit with YouTube. I do pay-per-click. I run my own pay-per-click, and I run it just on the Lawfather. So if anybody puts in the Lawfather anywhere, we're coming up with a pay-per-click ad.